And joining us now is John Nichols. He's a political writer for The Nation magazine and a one-man machine for saving New York City from Bloombergism and the country at large from a reckless invasion. John, how are you?
I'm fitting you in the schedule, brother. I don't know how effective I am on all these great projects you assigned to me, but I'll do my best.
Well, we have faith in you. So, John, I want to start. For people who don't know this, really briefly, I think most of our listeners probably do. There's a mayoral election going on in New York City. Bill De Blasio, who's the public advocate of New York City, is surged into the lead. He's running a progressive campaign on economic issues, which is really the differentiation in New York. Most of New York, on from Bloomberg through all of the mainstream Democrats, are pretty socially progressive. But he's running a progressive economic campaign. And over the weekend, Mayor Bloomberg finally just lost it in an interview with New York Magazine, accusing De Blasio of everything from running a racist campaign to a class warfare campaign. So I want to get into more of the details here, but off the top, John, what was Bloomberg saying in this New York Magazine interview?
Well, he didn't say it formally, but I'm getting the sense he is not going to vote for Bill De Blasio.
All right.
Look, Mike Bloomberg has been the mayor of New York City for 12 years, and the dominant political player in the city. People need to understand this, folks who don't live in New York. Mike Bloomberg came in and under term limits, he could only serve a certain amount of time. He opened his wallet, launched a campaign, and essentially bought a change in the rules and regulations of the city to let him serve another term. So the guy has sort of rolled over New York for the better part of 12 years. In some ways, he has been a useful mayor. There are many people who can find something they agree with him on. Even Bill De Blasio, our candidate here we're talking about a little bit, has worked with him on some issues. But it's quite clear that Bloomberg has a favorite in the mayoral race. That is Christine Quinn. She is the city council president of New York, a very accomplished player in her own regard. And, by most measures in the United States, Christine Quinn would be a liberal Democrat.
If she was running for
Democrat.
Senate in Missouri, we would be supporting her.
What?
I said if she was running
Missouri,
for...
she'd be off the charts, right? But the thing to understand is that in New York City, the divide really is on what you're going to do about a really rapidly widening income inequality gap. Are you going to, and this is very, very simple calculus, are you going to tax the rich or not? And Bill De Blasio has bluntly said he's going to tax the rich. He is proposing an increase in the upper limit on taxes, not a dramatic one, but one that he suggests will gather about $500 million a year, about $500 million, and move that money into preschool and after-school education projects and community projects, which he says are some of the best ways to help to aid the people who are on sort of the losing end of that income inequality gap. And De Blasio has made this case very, very strongly. It has struck a chord by most accounts. He is leading in the polls. And it's quite clear that Mike Bloomberg doesn't like that.
Right. So in this interview, because I think you're right that the real fundamental focus here is the economic equity and opportunity questions, John Nichols. But I think that in the interview, basically, really briefly, if you haven't read it, the other thing to add here is that Bill De Blasio, his wife is African American, and he has two biracial children that he is campaigning with, like pretty much any other politician who has a family probably will do some campaign events with them. And Bloomberg actually called De Blasio's campaign racist, which is what's been garnering the most headlines. And then he actually leveled the class warfare charge. I think there are two really important things here to get into the Bloomberg mindset, and the mindset really of a certain section of New York that is standing by and has no problem with this kind of rampant and escalating and really out of control income inequality in the city. Basically, with the notion of that De Blasio's exploiting the race card just by campaigning with his family, and then Bloomberg added that New York, to the extent there is a division in this city, it's that the wealthy pay for services for everybody else. Now, that sounds obnoxious on its face, but it's also
This is also after he went on a whole rant about how a tale of two cities is destructive for the city, and then he goes ahead and says that.
Right. De Blasio's campaign theme is a tale of two cities, but that's really empirically wrong. What are the numbers behind that, and also what do you think Bloomberg was trying to do with this, bringing this racial component in, which everybody's reacted to?
Well, so there's a lot of you packed a lot in that very good question.
There were two there, John. I'm for sure.
Of it.
Sorry about
first
that.
Off, the racial component. It is, I think Bloomberg is bringing up the racial reality. I think he is, to be honest, in defense of Bloomberg, I think he was trying to talk politics there,
right,
and doing it very ineptly.
Right.
It is true. There's simply no doubt that part of Bill De Blasio's appeal has been the incredible appeal of his family, and the fact that his son Dante has appeared in very, very effective TV ads, and I think that, bizarrely enough, I think that bugged Bloomberg. I think it isn't. I don't think that Bloomberg's particularly. I think that we have to be careful about suggesting that Bloomberg is, some sort of darkly evil figure who's, ranting about race and things like that. I think what he was kind of grumbling about is the fact that De Blasio has actually achieved something that, for lack of a better term, Bloomberg has a fascination with, has not been able to do himself well.
Yeah.
And that is to cross a lot of racial lines. But the way that Bloomberg did it was so ineffectual and so I think offensive to a lot of people, saying that it's a racist campaign to highlight the fact that you have a diverse family. First off, as you well point out, just about every politician has their family out there. If they don't have their family out there, it's something that makes news. It's not news if you campaign with your family. But the fact that De Blasio really does have a family that, for lack of a better way of saying it, has allowed him to talk about some issues that not every candidate has been talking about and has been as effective on. Things like the stop and frisk law, some of the other issues of racial justice in New York City. De Blasio has crossed lines that other people don't. And so I just thought that Bloomberg was trying very ineptly to talk about politics there and to grumble about things. But I really do think the core of Bloomberg's remarks was that class warfare thing. I think that's where Bloomberg, it seems quite evident, is very, very upset. And Bloomberg has clearly, in his tenure, established a model for governance in New York that is very friendly to the very, very wealthy, and of which he is one. And it doesn't mean that he's been some sort of right-wing Scott Walker type or something like that, but it does mean that he has governed in a way that has really done very little to undermine the rush toward income inequality. And in fact, we have seen the amount of revenues in New York City, the amount of money made in New York City that goes into the pocket of the very wealthy, expand dramatically over the last 30 years. And so De Blasio is saying, look, we should claw some of that back. And here's the two important factors in what Bloomberg was saying. Number one, when Mayor Bloomberg refers to the wealthy as the fortunate ones, that's his term he uses, the fortunate ones who pay the bills and who sort of like shoulder the weight of doing the city, you would think, wow, I mean, man, I must see the rich people just doing everything. the fact is the majority of revenues for New York City come from working people,
Right.
not from the very, very wealthy. The wealthy pay a lot of taxes in New York. It's true. But they're not the ones shouldering the whole of the burden. And at the end of the day, and I think this is part of what De Blasio, and frankly, we should note some other candidates as well. De Blasio, I think, has gotten the most traction on this, but some other candidates as well, pointing out that you've got a situation now in New York City where there are very, very wealthy people who pay a small portion of their income in taxes in New York City, where there are very, very poor people, tens of thousands of homeless people who can't even get by. And in such an equation, in such a calculus, the idea of proposing a small tax increase is hardly radical. It's Franklin Roosevelt stuff.
Absolutely. And I think, John Nichols, by the way, John Nichols joining us, politics writer for The Nation magazine. I think that there's something really important here, though, that's symbolized by Bloomberg and by the eruption over what really is, as you point out, a pretty moderate tax increase proposal by Bill De Blasio. In the sense that, and I think, again, precisely because Bloomberg has been good on some issues, but it's this notion that when it comes to the marketplace, or when it comes, in Bloomberg's case, even to use the mechanism of government and state power to intervene pretty radically in public health and personal public health decisions. I would defend a lot of those policies, but they're pretty bold steps in terms of intervening in people's choices. The notion that in those areas there's this complete realm of choice. There's a lot we can do, and we should let the evidence guide us. And then as soon as we get to talking about revenue and dealing with extreme economic inequality and making the most modest steps on taxes, that is, to borrow a phrase that's being thrown around a lot these days, that's a red line, and we can't cross it. There's something very disturbing about that juxtaposition, and that's at the heart of Bloomberg politics, it seems to me.
Well, and I think that's at the heart of our American politics.
Yeah.
Remember, Mike Bloomberg, is I would say, arguably in the middle of American politics, maybe even a little bit to the left of a lot of our national, and the overall scheme of where our political center of gravity is. So, understand him as such. He is not merely speaking as himself, I don't think. I think he's speaking for a sort of a worldview that has become very, very popular in this age of austerity. And remember, austerity is where we say to, working folks, look, the rich people have made a lot of money. They've lived large. Now our budgets don't balance, so you have to pay for it.
Right.
And the working people say, well, hold it. Well, what about the rich guy? And this is the calculus that De Blasio has brought into this race. It's why we're talking about it today. We're not talking about this race because New York City mayoral races are the only thing going on politically. In fact, there's an awful lot going on. But this primary tomorrow really does put some fundamental questions in play. And the fundamental questions that are in play in a city, our largest city, a city with so much going on, so much vibrance, and frankly, a city that in some ways has benefited from some of Mike Bloomberg's governance, is it possible in such a big governmental entity to create a more equitable circumstance? Not one that is totally fair to everybody or where everybody's got the same amount, but a situation where when you have, hundreds of thousands of millionaires living in a city, but then also hundreds of thousands, many, many hundreds of thousands of people living below the poverty level, can we address that to some extent? And what Bill De Blasio has said, which I think is, again, a renewal of an FDR, Harry Truman politics, hardly something all that radical, is yes, it's possible. With tax policy, you can move some money from the very, very wealthy to programs that serve those with the least, especially children coming up. And we're going to see what happens. I mean, in a way, people should give Mike Bloomberg some measured credit. He spoke very, very bluntly on the eve of an election. It stirred things up in a major way, and now the choices are very stark. it's very, very clear going into this primary. There could be a runoff election. There will be a general election. I think what Bloomberg was telescoping is what the opposition to De Blasio will be. It will be a little more sophisticated in its language, perhaps, but basically this notion that De Blasio is dangerous because he wants to tax. And so, in a way, I give Bloomberg credit for kind of laying out that opposition line. And now we're going to have elections, and people are going to have a choice on whether they want to continue with a political and economic model that seems to always come back to poor and working folks having to sacrifice while very wealthy people get dramatically wealthier, versus a model that's a little bit more respectful of the idea of equity.
Absolutely. And the other possibility that I'll just dangle out there is that maybe subconsciously Mike Bloomberg recognizes that Bill De Blasio should be the next mayor of New York City.
Isn't that an interesting concept?
But,
I can tell you this.
Yeah.
I can tell you this. I don't think in a Democratic primary, and in the rest of that interview, Mayor Bloomberg refers to De Blasio as a very populist, very left-wing kind of guy. I'm not sure that does a lot of damage in a New York Democratic primary.
Yeah, this is like De Blasio's closing argument for it couldn't have come at a better time, this kind of intervention from an electoral point of view. And I really briefly, too, before I get to the final question, in your article that you wrote for The Nation that I recommend everybody read called Mike Bloomberg and the Fortunate Ones versus Bill De Blasio, you say that De Blasio should follow FDR's lead in terms of welcoming their hatred, and that clip is part of the Majority Report intro on every show. So
I know it is. I've heard your show.
Yeah.
Well, and I look. The simple reality is that Franklin Roosevelt, one of the most successful presidents in American history, and a man who continues to be revered for his ability to govern, and frankly, for his ability to make things better, not just for the poor and the working class, but also for a lot of wealthy people,
right.
Said to those who opposed his policies, it wasn't that he said he welcomed the hatred of the wealthy. He was himself wealthy, but he said he welcomed the hatred of those who would organize themselves politically to advance their already prosperous economic interest, rather than to respect the fact that there are fair and equitable ways to run a city, a state, a nation. And to my mind, I think that instead of getting overly cautious, being uncomfortable with what Bloomberg has said, that De Blasio and frankly other political figures in New York should respect that it's time to open up an old line of argument, which is that FDR argument. If people are going to attack you for wanting to tax, big corporations in Wall Street, perhaps you should say, you bet.
Absolutely. And a final question, John Nichols, do you think there are national implications from this race?
Huge national implications. This is America's largest city. This is America's highest profile mayoralty. We know Mike Bloomberg because he's been mayor of New York. He was also a very successful businessman as well. But being mayor of New York is a big deal. It has been for generations. If an economic populist beats the other players, becomes mayor of New York, I think it's going to send very, very powerful messages, not just in New York State, but across this country, that there may be a different way to talk about both politics and economics. And on the other hand, if he loses, if he gets beat in a scare campaign about taxation, I think that will push Democrats further into the corner of being Republican-like. So this is an important race.
Yeah, I think that cannot be underscored enough as a New York voter. I think there's no question huge implications for the city and for the nation as a whole. John Nichols, De Blasio's taken care of. Now go stop the airstrikes on Syria.
Well, we'll certainly try and keep that debate going.
Thank you so much for joining us. John Nichols, political writer for The Nation.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.